And logically, in principle, this debate shouldn't even arise, since ECOWAS is an institution that exists that has an even broader scope, including Anglophone countries, etc. But UMOA, which was established in January 1994, has a very specific purpose. It is purely economic and monetary. And so, normally, it was supposed to completely distance itself from political matters. It turns out that today, unfortunately, the political problems we had already seen in the context of ECOWAS. Remember, when there were coups in those countries, especially in Mali, how ECOWAS even tried to use UMOA as a tool by taking control of Mali's monetary reserves and later on Niger's and so on. So this is to say that, in fact, it's the same tune being played as soon as it became clear that there are leaders within ECOWAS, within that community, who are literally working for Western powers who, unfortunately, view the sovereignist ambitions being pursued by the AES countries with a very unfavorable eye. So it's not surprising that today a country like Cote d'Ivoire is opposed to Burkina Faso taking over the rotating presidency of this commission, or at least the Council of Ministers of UMOA, because we can see behind this all the revelations that could come out regarding the management of UMOA. So yes, it's true that in principle the ECOWAS conflict shouldn't have been brought into UMOA, but here we are. Since even at the ECOWAS level, UMOA had already been used as a tool specifically for economic retaliation against these countries.
At the heart of the matter regarding the subject of the dispute, Excellent Sogoyu Kegi, is UMOA a trading arm, as they say, of ECOWAS?
I don't know how you want to set UMOA and ECOWAS against each other. It's the same master holding the same rope of the same slaves. It's the same master. He holds the rope of the same slaves, whether you say ECOWAS or UMOA. It's the same master holding the rope and pulling it. When you say here that Cote d'Ivoire is against this or that, no, it's not Cote d'Ivoire. It's the Ivorian president. Be careful. There are times when you have to distinguish between the leader and his people. If we were to hold a referendum today in Cote d'Ivoire, well, 90% will support Ouagadougou's position. So it's not Cote d'Ivoire, it's an Ivorian leader who has been given the mandate to enslave other black people for the master. Everyone knows. So let's not get confused. Let's not say, ECOWAS or UMOA. It's all the same. ECOWAS is the same people. ECOWAS is dead. Well, it's a corpse that's still trying to move. And it takes occasions like the UMOA for the corpse of ECOWAS to move again. The opportunity is too rare not to seize it. We still have to expect that ECOWAS will live on. Otherwise, as you said, UMOA has a purely financial and technical character. But in Africa, we really need to learn to draw the line one day between politics and the economy. There are countries that do not get along politically, but that have common economic interests, which they defend because they know that the economy, development, and the well-being of their people depend on it. When will Africans be able to say that even if we don't get along politically, we have a duty to cooperate economically and financially? Because today we talk about developed countries, emerging countries, all these terms we toss around like charlatans, like illusionists, miracle workers, magicians, but the people are all in the same mess. Emerging or not emerging in West Africa, black people are all in the same mess. Don't political leaders realize that no matter what is said, their people face the same problems and that we need to find a common ground to ease the suffering of the population rather than catering to the whims of a leader, a bigwig, an emperor sitting in his palace 6,000 kilometers from here? So this whole ECOWAS and WEMU story is completely normal. That the problems of ECOWAS have found their way into WEMU, given everything we're seeing now.
Unless you heard the answer. The next question was, why is it that the president of Ivory Coast is stopping the president of Burkina Faso or the Burkina Faso to take over the presidency? Is the sanctions the ECOWAS sanctions and the UMOA, is it the same? Or is it because of the sanctions that they are preventing them from taking their rightful place? Why? What is going on?
Let's technically analyze what is at the root of the problem. The issue concerns the rotating presidency of the institution. And according to the rules, it goes in turn, and it was Burkina Faso's turn to preside over WEMU. So why is there opposition to Burkina Faso's presidency of the institution? Well, normally this question should go directly to the Ivorian president and his minister of economy, who have taken the lead in this opposition, to tell us. But listen, you have rules. You have rules that govern the functioning of a structure. Name of what, and on the basis of which principles? Are you directly opposing a phenomenon that should be natural? It's a rotating governance. You see, the real problem we generally have in Africa is that our leaders are not disciplined. Disciplined in the sense that they comply, yes. I mean, essentially, that is, they abide by the rules of living together. If UMOA took the time to establish a system of rotation and a mechanism for the functioning of this institution, it's undoubtedly because we specifically want to avoid a situation where someone thinks that, yes, they have greater economic weight or enjoy some kind of privilege and therefore would have preference over others. All voices within this community, in principle, are equal. And so that means that as sovereign states, all 8 of these countries, each one's voice must be able to count. But it so happens that Cote d'Ivoire, with more than 40% of the GDP of this region, and also certain connections, because after all, we know a bit about the history or President Ouattara's positions. First of all, regarding Burkina Faso, or at least the Sahel countries in general. All the disputes between them, which have always been the subject of debate everywhere on talk shows, we know very well that he is someone who is literally hostile to the AES countries. Then we also know his position regarding the CFA franc and his clear leaning towards France, where why the countries in that region were working to obtain a new currency, I'm talking about the ECOWAS, was with the careful complicity of President Ouattara that, well, listen, Emmanuel Macron landed in Cote d'Ivoire on the 31st of December to hijack and strip away the spirit and the letter that were supposed to guide the process of establishing specifically this new currency. And what's more, the same Ivorian president goes to France to staunchly defend the CFA franc as a currency that should be recommended for the countries in that region. And then he proudly recalls his background as governor of the BCEAO, advisor to this or that, financial expert. And so he blatantly goes against common sense and reason when it comes to at least the assertion of the sovereignty of African states. So we can't really be surprised. From the moment we know today that the AES countries are rigorously and methodically organizing themselves to break free from all these bottlenecks, in any case, from all the mechanisms that have been put in place since the foundational process of decolonization to maintain control over the former African colonies. So I think that, first of all, these precedents are consistent. They are consistent, at least those who are opposing, those who are defiant towards Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, they are consistent in their hostility. Just as the AES countries remain firm in their commitment to the process of sovereignty. So let's analyze the motives from the point of view, well, of Cote d'Ivoire. I believe that the UMOA sanctions against the AES have not been lifted. Some have been suspended. So if these countries are under sanctions, can we really entrust them with the presidency of the institution? Inaudible. At the very least, let's leave Cote d'Ivoire out of this.
The Ivorian head of state is just someone's emissary. He's a poor guy, really. When you look at him, you have to feel sorry for him. I'm not even sure that he himself is convinced in his heart about what he's doing, that he actually wants to torment his African brothers. But since he has no choice, since that's the condition for him to be where he is, in what he's in, is the condition for him to rig elections as the sole candidate.
There is no sole candidate in Cote d'Ivoire.
I said, let me speak. Up until now, my role
is to ensure moderation.
Yes, moderation.
The speech police.
Yes, up until now, can you give me the list of upcoming candidates for the thing? Now, if In Cote d'Ivoire, you have candidates like Adani Ife in Togo. Well, you can't tell me there are multiple candidates, because when I make the candidates myself, I know exactly who I'm going to put forward. Hands up, watch out. So at the end of the day, let's just leave Cote d'Ivoire aside, because this CFA franc is the last free stake France has left in Africa.
Yes, we talk about all that. But my question,
Yes.
it seems to me that the UMOA sanctions are still in effect regarding the countries of the yes.
The UMOA sanctions, I don't know them by heart, but what I can tell you is that these are ECOWAS sanctions. We're going to wage war on them. We're going to force the military, 850. They've already got their money and their bags on their backs, food, everything. They're going to go and liberate. And the countries of the Sahel realize that ECOWAS wants to do worse than the terrorists, meaning it wants to attack even more dangerously than the terrorists. They said, if that's how it is, your ECOWAS, we're leaving it. Today, UMOA is the same thing. Tomorrow, when these fed-up countries say, listen, take your UMOA, you see now that so-called emissaries will be sent. Oh no, you have to come back with the same family. Now is the time to prove to these countries that we are the same family, and that no matter the frictions, we must find common ground. No one is looking for common ground. You are talking about the sanctions of the UMOA. Why do we have to punish people just because they want their freedom? Even animals want their freedom. Your hen that you locked in that thing there, the hen house there, when you go inside at noon, open it, you see if it will stay in the hen house. She's going to go out and leave. Your sheep, your goat that you had, the one you put a leash around its neck, take off the leash and you see if it leaves. So for human beings who are asking to be free, to be hunted down, persecuted, ostracized, tortured by people who should normally be supporting them because they themselves need freedom. What do you want to understand? UMOA sanctions, ECOWAS sanctions. It's the same nonsense, the same colonial ways of acting. And just like the head colonist standing there with his whip on the sugarcane plantation in Louisiana, whipping the other black people to make them walk straight, he's there doing his job. For me, it's simple. The AES countries, which have never taken such an initiative out of the blue, are conditioned. And when they've had enough, they make a decision. They were forcibly pushed to leave ECOWAS, so they left. Now they are being forced to leave the WMO. One day they leave, I'm sure, and then they be blamed. Blamed for what? You kick us out. You don't want us. So we leave, and then you blame us for what? So I think the AES countries understood too quickly what was happening. Otherwise, in terms of economy and finance with WMO, Burkina Faso is next in line. Burkina Faso is presiding. But the problem is that when you preside over WMO, you have to go from time to time to pledge allegiance in Paris. And since in Burkina, there's no one to parade in Paris to pledge allegiance, it bothers people, that's all.
Families, you hear him. What is going on is because AES is moving away from France, and so Captain Ibrahim Traore need to go to France, Paris. Can you imagine him saluting and pledging? I don't know the pledge for the money as well. Oh, families, please listen to more, and I'll be back.
You can't really imagine Traore on the steps of the Elysee going to pledge allegiance just because he's president of WMO. What kind of nonsense is that? What are these monkey stories? So when you want sovereignty, you want it all the way. Because others think that with WAEMU, they still have the last rope to keep these countries in check. But they're going to leave. Afterwards, don't send people saying we're the same. You have to come back. Come back to what?
No, but even this question, I think this issue of sanctions is a false problem. Because first of all, when Mali was sanctioned in such an abusive way, Mali actually took the matter to the WMO Court of Justice. And that court issued a ruling literally calling for the suspension of those sanctions. And that court issued a ruling literally calling for the suspension of those sanctions. But the states, this is why I was talking about discipline, the heads of states, did not understand that they had to respect a judicial decision from a judicial institution that was established precisely to regulate the functioning mechanism and above all to maintain fairness among the leaders, or at least among the countries. You see, but I don't even recall that ECOWAS also censured ECOWAS and Burkina Faso. It was Niger and Mali that were subject to that sanction. And then, secondly, a leader can never make a decision without referring to a legal framework. That's why the legal arsenal is made available to the governor, so as to make it easier for them to make decisions and political, economic, and other choices. On what legal grounds today is Burkina Faso being prohibited or prevented from rightfully exercising governance over the Council of Ministers of the WAMU?
Actually, more of a moral one, because the sanctions that had been imposed on Niger, for example, have been lifted. I can remind you of them. They include the closure of land and air borders between Niger and the UMOA countries, the suspension of all commercial and financial transactions between UMOA countries and Niger, the freezing of the assets of the state of Niger, as well as public and semi-public enterprises held in commercial banks of UMOA member states, and the suspension of all assistance and financial transactions in favor of Niger by UMOA financial institutions, notably the West African Development Bank. So these sanctions have been lifted.
Indeed, it is absolutely imperative that we collectively and unequivocally cease uttering such pronouncements, and furthermore, that we refrain from reiterating those particular statements or allowing them to be voiced in any capacity whatsoever. This cessation is not merely a suggestion, but a critical necessity. As for the individual in question, specifically regarding his actions, his motivations, his involvement, or any underlying circumstances that might conceivably explain his behavior or the situation at hand, despite an exhaustive, meticulous, and profoundly thorough investigation, despite diligent inquiry from every conceivable angle, despite extensive analysis of all available data, and despite persistent efforts to uncover any shred of evidence, we have been utterly and completely unable to ascertain, discover, identify, or even surmise any discernible, logical, justifiable, or even remotely plausible rational cause or explanation whatsoever. There appears to be no discernible motive, no understandable impetus, no comprehensible basis, and absolutely no rational foundation for what has transpired or for his involvement in it. Every avenue of inquiry, every line of questioning, and every potential lead has, without exception, led to a dead end, leaving us without any satisfactory, compelling, or even remotely plausible reason to account for the circumstances surrounding him. Consequently, we are left in a state of profound perplexity, unable to comprehend the underlying factors that contribute to this perplexing situation, and thus we remain entirely without any valid, compelling, or even remotely acceptable reason to explain the events or his role within them, leaving us in a state of complete bewilderment and lacking any form of closure or understanding.
Logical or motive. Legal, we'll have to read between the lines, because UMOA, above all, is an economic and monetary union. That means there's a direct link with the CFA franc, which is managed in one way or another, in any case produced in France. So if the presidency of UMOA is entrusted to a country that is at odds with France, couldn't that, let's say, slow things down? Couldn't that...
Well,
yes, very interesting question. So, but AES is already planning for their currency. We know that whether they are in that or not, they are planning. They are always one step ahead, because these three leaders, they weigh them. They know their games. They know it in and out. They are not children. They know. Thanks to internet. So they work it out properly. They know they're going to have their own currency one day, because they don't want their foreign reserve to be in somebody else's country and be developing it. And then one day when they say, no, we don't want to obey, and then they will say, we seize it. It happened to Venezuela when their people are hungry on the street, common medicine they can't get. And democracy countries, developed countries hold their money. they said we are not going to give it to you. They just want to frustrate the people to turn against their leader. Anyway, I'm going. Let's listen to more. I'll be back.
Listen, that is to say, Burkina Faso isn't asking for any special privilege. It's a right. Okay. Now, if people start getting into calculations, well, that's their problem. In any case, the AES countries are in a process. Whether people like it or not, that is to say, is it really normal if people were truly acting in good faith? But this is an opportunity to give the right to ECOWAS and then finally to Burkina Faso and to see what it would do with it. The Le Mans countries are at least 8. I'll even follow up on what the ambassador was saying to point out that he's absolutely right. Because in fact, let's suppose it was President Ouattara alone who was opposed to Burkina Faso's presidency. But there are 8 of them in total. That means if they have to proceed by a vote, there must at least be an imbalance. Since there are 3 of them, so if the others don't agree with President Ouattara's position, of course, the balance will.
Do they make decisions by voting or by unanimity? I don't know.
I think they need a consensus. Now, if there is no consensus, but why isn't there a consensus? If it's just one person who objects, there will be a problem. Do you agree with me? This really supports the ambassador's argument that, yes, strings are being pulled somewhere. And since our states still haven't freed themselves from those strings, from that Western, specifically French influence, well, okay, let's try to see what's needed. No, I understood that demonstration, but
I'm asking, look, if Burkina takes the presidency of UMOA while Burkina is at odds with France.
But being at odds with France, what does that even mean? UMOA belongs to France. UMOA belongs to France. And
it's at odds with France. Is it the banknote printing machines in Chamalières that are at odds? Does that stop us from producing the CFA? While half of our terrorists are against us, and barely a tenth is given to us. We, black people, have to deposit our foreign exchange reserves at the Bank of France. The terrorist money is deposited there. How much over there? So we can't really say they are at odds with France. It shouldn't be France's moods that determine the currency and the lives of 8 African countries. That's just not acceptable. Let's approach things calmly as black people. That's what I'm asking.
But are we talking about next year? Is it
that a country that doesn't negotiate, that doesn't have the...
Yes. How do you say but?
Wait, it's not Burkina that's refusing to talk with France. It's France that's saying that as soon as Burkina refuses slavery, it's no longer considered a friend. What exactly do you expect Burkina Faso to do in this situation? The undeniable reality is the fundamental crime of Burkina Faso, along with its neighboring nations, Mali and Niger, is simply that we profoundly desire to be truly free and independent. Yes, but this deep-seated aspiration for self-determination is what drives our actions.
Is the diplomatic cooperation between France and Burkina cut off, but they still have cooperative relations? We agree on that. Now, we're in a state-to-state context. And it turns out that according to the rules of a shared institution, it's Burkina Faso's turn to assume the presidency. But what's interesting in all this, actually, is that the UMOA countries are literally exposing themselves, and in a very kind way, simply to help the AES countries stand by their choice. What they were doing, quite simply, is that after leaving ECOWAS, after setting up a number of community institutions that allow them to create a space of their own, which they fund, manage and run the last step, which we've always hoped for, was for them to create their own currency. And so they created an investment bank. Expect them to create a central bank. And then, well, from that point on, once they have their own currency, I'm thinking January, December, it's very likely that the last 2 steps will be taken. And then we'll say, look, it's precisely the hostility of certain UMOA countries that actually made this sovereign move possible, but which of course will guarantee full sovereignty. Advocate for and support this precisely through these states. But is it
that the AES countries need to push UMOA into making a mistake before leaving? Wait, who are they pushing and into what mistake? We're saying it's statutory. They told the Bourgogne has 2 presidents. That's statutory. Is it Ibrahim Traore who wrote the statutes of UMOA? But that was there before he arrived. It's statutory. We refuse it. Is it now him pushing people, or is it people pushing him by refusing? It's all of them. It's everyone. Now, what he needs to do is to meet quickly to change the statute. Because as long as they haven't changed this statute, any other solution is illegal. This is a story of bandits, of mobsters, and it doesn't hold up. You can't, on the back of a currency, behave like an outlaw bandit. It's not possible. So they quickly changed the statute that made rotation mandatory. And now, whoever claims to have the usual 40% of the UMOA's money supply, they say he's the eternal president of UMOA. And then that's the end of it. While waiting for him to one day escape slavery himself. That's the day things will blow up and will get really bloody. I think I'll leave it at that.
For now, isn't it surreal that an institution of this size, which manages our currency, ends up not even applying the rules it set for itself?
What's so surprising about that? With the divisions in our region, nothing is surprising anymore. Because the principle of enforcing laws practically doesn't exist. People govern their countries based on their own moods. Or at least they are being remotely controlled by an external power. And from that point on, when you don't belong to yourself, you end up being inconsistent every time. Otherwise, it's still absurd to see an institution like this one. Because normally they should be governing by example, you see. We, the ordinary citizens or opinion leaders who are watching and waiting to be inspired by the disciplined, upright, and truly orthodox behavior of our leaders. But when we see so much wandering, so much inconsistency, so much amateurism, and so much incongruity in the choices and positions these leaders take, we say to ourselves, listen, we're not being governed. So, as you said, indeed, it's surreal, but it shouldn't be. It's surprising because we are used to the blatant and constant violations of all the laws that have been built, established, and that unfortunately should be upheld by these leaders. And so today, they have chosen to act on a whim, and it's really unfortunate for our region.
Jews, you see, we're just beating around the bush. You say there's no rigor, and so on. They give you monkey money and put grimacing monkeys in charge of managing that money. What kind of rigor do you expect? Monkey money managed like monkeys, taking all the 7 contradictory ones, nobody cares, and they just follow them. But do you know, at the Federal Reserve in the United States, even Trump can't make decisions. He can't tell the president of the Federal Reserve, do this or do that, and expect him to obey. Because if politics gets involved in that, it kills the dollar. The ECB in Europe, the euro. There isn't a single European head of state who can pick up the phone, tell the president of the ECB in Frankfurt, do this, do that, and have it carried out. That would kill the euro. But in Africa, as I've always said, the CFA isn't really a currency. It's just cabbage leaves printed with steam to scam black people. Why do you want there to be any rigor? What kind of rigor do you expect us to follow? Are there rules for cabbage leaves too?
No, he just said, so he can't
Do it.
at the Council of Ministers meeting held here in Lomé. In the end, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali walked out. Exactly.
Considering the gravity of the unfolding situation, look, I must press you on a matter of paramount importance. Does he, in his strategic deliberations and assessments of the current geopolitical landscape, truly perceive the profound, multifaceted, and increasingly imminent risks that are not merely looming, but actively converging upon us from all directions? Is he fully cognizant of the potential catastrophic consequences, the far-reaching and devastating repercussions that could arise from the present precarious circumstances, consequences that threaten to unravel the very fabric of our existence? Furthermore, with the escalating tensions, the relentless pressures, and the increasingly precarious position in which they find themselves, are the days of the UMOA, a people whose very existence, their rich cultural heritage, and their long-standing traditions are now seemingly hanging by the thinnest of threads, irrevocably and tragically numbered? Are we, Luke, witnessing the undeniable twilight of their civilization, a sorrowful and irreversible end to their long and storied history, as the ominous shadows of impending doom lengthen inexorably across their ancestral lands, threatening to engulf them entirely? I implore you, Luke, to consider the immense depth of this peril and the urgent necessity of our inquiry into his true understanding of these dire and existential threats.
Did you know that they have G5 Sahel? First time today, I have learned it. I told you I've been learning every day on this thing that I'm doing. I don't know, I will call it a job. I'll be learning every day. Did you know they have something called G5 Sahel? First time I've heard. Please listen to this news. I'll be back.
Maybe before answering your question, do you remember the story of the G5 Sahel? When Shah held the presidency of the G5 Sahel, and then as it rotated, it was Mali's turn. You saw everything that happened. And then there was no legal principle that could explain Chad's reluctance to hand over the presidency to Mali. As a result, Mali quietly withdrew from the G5 Sahel.
Who talks about it? Who
talks about it? So this is to say that all these unnatural arrangements orchestrated by the West France in particular can no longer succeed. From the moment there is light inside and it begins to enlighten people's minds. So with the three countries having withdrawn, it sends a political signal, a very strong one. And so they have first demonstrated proof of their consistency, their solidarity, and their ability to remain united under any circumstances. So that means that once they leave, in any case, the CFA will be shaken. I don't see how the three AES countries could leave the CFA franc. So leave the UMOA and the CFA franc, and the CFA franc will still retain its current value. It's clear that this is a significant part, which will therefore be spared, and we would be forced, if you will, to reassess this model. The threat is there. I don't understand how, even at the highest levels of our state leadership, we don't realize that it's always the union that loses strength. You've been putting something in place for over 30 years with the goal, in any case, of becoming stronger, of consolidating yourself in a dynamic of progress. And then, precisely for one reason or for another, because of someone's whims, because of the interest of someone who isn't even affected by your fate, you decide to implode all of this and thus risk exposing your people to hardship. And, well, it's still rather sad.
Yes, but I'm a bit surprised not to see more concern on your face when you mention the implosion of the UM, because the consequences, as you said, will affect the average citizen. It's going to be felt.
The average citizen doesn't matter in Francophone countries. He
doesn't matter. It doesn't exist. The situation is already difficult. Many say they are hungry. A monetary crisis in the region, 8 months now, with the likely exit of the AES countries.
Isn't it actually going to be a bit more challenging than that? No, in actual fact, it's considerably better, Your Excellency. No, shouldn't the political society, that intricate and fundamental framework encompassing governmental institutions, legislative bodies, and public administration, along with the civil society, that vibrant and diverse tapestry of non-governmental organizations, community groups, advocacy networks, and individual citizens actively engaged in collective action truly take hold and assert its rightful influence and authority within the broader societal landscape? Shouldn't these fundamental pillars of a functioning and just society actively engage, assume responsibility, and effectively guide the direction of public discourse and collective action, ensuring that the collective will and well-being of the populace are paramount in all decisions and developments? This implies a profound and active engagement, a robust assertion of their inherent power and responsibility to shape the future, establishing their presence and impact, guiding the populace towards a more organized, equitable, and prosperous future.
This issue, because this is a needless monetary crisis we're experiencing. Wait.
I know
your friendship with civil society.
civil society. Who funds them? Before we go on, before continuing to answer, who creates and funds this civil society? Go ahead.
Not only that, but our problem is that we're not able to see what's coming next. We're not able to anticipate. You see, people will just stay like this. And when we start to suffer the consequences of this implosion, without joking, people would begin to get agitated and turn against their leaders. But even at that point, when we can already see the threats, normally opinion leaders, intellectuals, human rights organizations, etc., should have already taken up the issue to create a buzz about it and expose the threats that are present. But we are often passive. We tell ourselves, well, it's not a big deal. It's just a political decision being made. But in the end, the consequences fall precisely on the citizens of that area. It's unfortunate. I think that's a great question you're asking. We should seize this opportunity to call out the opinion leaders, intellectuals. I think everyone now needs to start taking responsibility. It's true, decision makers are in their own bubble. Maybe they have constraints, as we say, because there are people who play a catalytic role, preventing them from having the necessary clarity. But if there is enough progress within society, with opinion leaders and intellectuals who take responsibility and step out of their comfort zones, who truly address issues with efficiency and rigor, then it's fine. Mobilize public opinion and actually force leaders to discipline themselves. I think what the ambassador said is absolutely true, which is that all international institutions, Western powers, as well as institutions like the IMF, the World Bank, etc., do not take people into account when making their decisions. It's a capitalist system that prioritizes money as the god of our current lives. You want to negotiate prices for example, with the IMF, you have internal problems, but the IMF will tell you to squeeze your people even more in order to make your country's debts profitable. Do you think at that moment there are any feelings for the citizens' life, for their well-being? No, it's money first. It's the profitability of the investment first. That's why we need to change this entire paradigm. And every citizen must be able to see what their role is in this new dynamic. We need to be able to initiate this so that human beings are at the heart of all the political decisions leaders have to make.
For me, the two situations are similar. The threat of Niger being invaded by ECOWAS, and then this disruption of the monetary zone caused by the refusal to recognize the presidency in Burkina Faso. For me, the consequences of these two
Situations be same. But here, for International Monetary
Union, it
doesn't really move anyone. ECOWAS has threatened to invade Niger. No, it hasn't just threatened. As we speak, it is perpetually invading Niger and the Sahel countries. Every day, the terrorists are gaining strength. Where do they come from? The terrorists who have drones, where do they get them from? Where ECOWAS is working on this. So today, against this invasion, there are some who have raised their hands to say no, but this time,
for this presidency. Why the others? It's the same logic. The one who tells them to torture their brother just to please him is there. Yes, but he was there before the others told us no to ECOWAS intervention in Niger. But why this time?
And those who said no, tell me, what happiness awaits them today? Those who said no, that Niger should not be invaded, that the Sahel countries should not be ostracized, what happiness awaits them today at the very moment when you and I are sitting here talking? Do you see their suffering? Do you see what they are enduring? But no one will tell you, we're doing this to you because you left your port open to the Sahel countries, because you refused to let Niger be invaded. They won't say that to you. But they torture you along with your own brothers. Black people have always sold out other black people with pleasure. That's the real tragedy. That's why when you ask me about the effects on the ordinary citizen, the average person, but sometimes the average citizen who hasn't been given any explanation ends up being the very gravedigger of his own misfortunes. But it's not his fault. It's because no one explained it to him. Who is supposed to explain? You mentioned civil society groups. They were supposed to do the work of explaining, weren't they? But the funding they receive isn't meant for doing explanatory work on the ground. It's to attack and criticize the leaders of their own countries. That's why they are funded.
Yes.
I just want to come in a bit. When I listen to the IMF, I remember what happened in Kenya last year when the demonstration was going on, and then IMF has to come out when West got to West to apologize. So what our brother is saying, our uncle is saying, it is true. They don't think about the citizens. All they think about is money. It's business as usual for them. And ECOWAS, yes, where are the people getting the ammunition from? The neighboring countries that surrounded the AES.
But the Kabakis for the AES countries, they're really in hot water now. Won't they face difficulties with their own citizens? Because people will say to them, why did you wait so long to break away from him?
We have a substantial amount of time remaining, specifically 2 minutes, to delve into a comprehensive and detailed discussion about the fascinating and historically significant cowries. These intriguing shells, which you are actually wearing and displaying prominently on your fabric, hold a rich cultural and economic importance that spans across various civilizations and eras. We can explore their historical use as currency, their symbolic meaning in different societies, and the intricate ways they are incorporated into textiles and adornments, such as the very fabric you are currently wearing. This allows us ample opportunity to elaborate on their unique characteristics, their journey through time, and their enduring presence in contemporary fashion and cultural expression. Let's consider the specific attributes of these cowrie shells: their smooth porcelain-like surface, and the distinct aperture on their underside. Historically, they serve as a form of currency in many parts of Africa, Asia, and Oceania, facilitating trade and economic exchange. Beyond their monetary value, cowries also carried profound symbolic meanings, representing fertility, prosperity, and protection in various cultures. The way they are integrated into fabric, as seen on your attire, often involves meticulous stitching, weaving, or embellishment, transforming a simple textile into a piece of art imbued with cultural narrative. The fabric itself, perhaps a traditional cloth or a modern design, becomes a canvas for these ancient symbols. We can discuss the specific patterns or arrangements of the cowries on your fabric and what this might signify within a particular cultural context. This extended exploration will allow us to fully appreciate the multifaceted role of cowries, from their natural origins to their profound impact on human history, art, and personal adornment, as exemplified by their presence on your very own fabric.
Yes, that is absolutely correct. So within the scope of what we are discussing, or within the parameters we have established,
the UMOA, there's no problem. We are all African citizens who have endured the same colonization, the same neo-colonization, shameless exploitation, contempt, racism, and anti-blackness. All of us suffer from this. In fact, there's no reason we can't get along. But as soon as an outside hand gets involved, we'll never agree.
That's it. I think
he said it all. I don't think so.
What's still strange is that within ECOWAS, there are member states of the UEMOA who have been appointed to mediate between the AIS countries and ECOWAS so that they can come back. That is to say, ever since the AIS countries left, ECOWAS has seemed to be courting these states again so that they come back, because only together can we succeed. Here's a small group within a small unit, a subset of ECOWAS, whose purpose is to regulate monetary and economic life, which is also falling apart. So that means it's a constant hypocrisy. But President Diomaye Faye of Senegal, he was chosen to help facilitate reconciliation between the AIS countries and ECOWAS. He is part of the UEMOA. What is his position on the matter? You see, there is a certain ambiguity and an inability to make decisions, and that it reflects the fragility, and in any case, of the primitive and peripheral state in which our countries find themselves, and that they are not able to take responsibility for clear-sighted and responsible choices.
Via satellite or our app, which you can download